I've seen In a Violent Nature twice now, and will most likely see it again soon. It's going to be a divisive film, but I feel it will also usher in a new era of slashers, which is always good news. Let's gather around the campfire and talk about In a Violent Nature. In a Violent Nature is new in theaters from Shuder and IFC Films. It's directed and written by Nash. When a group of campers inadvertently disturb the resting place of a long-dead killer, the murderer, who has been the subject of many a campfire tale in the community, rises and seeks revenge on those who wronged him. If this premise seems familiar, it's intentional. It's the plot of many a slasher movie, most similar to Friday the 13th, the difference being that In a Violent Nature tells this tale from the perspective of the killer from the beginning to almost the end. While the slasher films of old have been accused of emulating the killer, this one literally hitches a ride on the back of the killer, forcing you to experience a typical Friday the 13th story from Jason's perspective, the victims playing only minor roles in the killer's path. Now, while this idea might seem like a good one on paper, I have to admit that seeing the story play out from the perspective of the killer is both intriguing, but occasionally quite tedious, if I'm being honest. There are long, and I mean long, portions of this film where we simply follow a few steps behind the killer as he meanders through the dense forest in a direct path towards his victims. Still, they keep it interesting. Early on, there's a wonderful scene where the killer is walking towards a road. A group of rowdy kids race by, screaming loudly and playing loud music, and the killer reacts without emotion, simply changing direction to follow the campers once he becomes aware of them. While Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees have been compared to a great white shark, always hunting and being drawn to blood from miles away, the killer in a Violent Nature moves in the same direct and unstoppable manner. Still, mileage is going to vary here. Each of these long stints of following the killer end in something that's going to cause a gasp or a laugh, and probably both, but I know some will lack the patience to get to it. But if you are patient, you're going to experience some of the most brutal and satisfying kills ever caught on film. While all of them are brutal and gory, one of the kills will go down in history as probably the gnarliest I have ever encountered. It garnered a round of applause from the audience I saw it with, and the applause was well-deserved indeed. Ry Barrett has basically sealed his casting as Jason if and when a new Friday the 13th movie is made. While we only see a few shots of his face, Barrett channels his inner Kane Hodder by using his body and actions to communicate the rage this character contains within. And just when you thought it would be difficult to come up with new ways to kill people, writer-director Nash delivers new and inventive ways to disassemble the human body. All of them are completely different and utterly ruthless. Nash, Barrett, and everyone behind In a Violent Nature seem to be uber fans of the Friday the 13th films. Most of the tropes are there, but the movies never venture into the realm of parody. Everything is taken seriously, and while there are quite a few moments of intentional laughter, the movie never fails to remind you that death is a horrifying experience here as the killer chops, hacks, smashes, and pounds his way through these unfortunate souls. While basically this is every silent slasher from Michael to Jason to Cropsey, In a Violent Nature stands out on its own by giving the killer his own relentless and tragic backstory, motivation for killing, rules of how the evil within him works and can be resurrected, and of course, how he can be stopped. Sure, it all feels familiar because it's an amalgamation of many a slasher film of old, but because this film seems to laud those movies so much, it's all taken seriously and thus feels new and fresh. And no killer is complete without his own distinct mask. This one dons an old fireman's mask, which I feel is the only critique I have about the design of the killer, as I feel the mask really isn't that scary, and the big screened-over eyes on the hood make him almost look goofy. Luckily, when the killer is in action, the mask didn't really distract me because the kills are so good, as well as the fact that most of the film shows the killer from behind anyway. Director of photography Pierce Dirks has a background in nature photography, which is why the scenery around this heinous murder spree looks so gorgeous. The talented camera work captures the greens, blues, and darks, making the nature of In a Violent Nature gorgeous as well as extremely violent. The darks hiding dark secrets and hidden dangers, while the colors are there to deceive you into a false sense of security. Still, this film is almost an ambient experience more than a slasher film. There are long scenes with no dialogue, and when there is dialogue, it's muffled and in the background because, again, this is the film from the killer's perspective, and who is sleeping with who and who has a beef with who is not really important to the killer. It definitely drives the point home that while the life of the killer seems exciting, much like any other profession, there are long periods of silence and boredom. A lot of thought has been put into In a Violent Nature, as there seems to be a whole other movie being filmed from a different perspective, but that movie is the one that we've seen many times. It's the fact that we're seeing it from the killer's perspective that makes it all so different. The sense of danger still is ever present as the killer lurks in the darkness somewhere. This point is made abundantly clear in the final moments, where the threat of the killer hangs like a dense fog around those who encounter this undead monster. I highly recommend you check out In a Violent Nature, but don't forget your patience. This feels like a slasher film for those who are able to reflect upon oneself and appreciate the wait between kills. The payoff is absolutely amazing once the kills do occur. One can only hope that the critical and hopefully financial success of In a Violent Nature can spark a new resurgence of slasher films and maybe give a much-needed kick in the ass to those idiots who are dragging ass on the Friday the 13th property, and get them to bring Jason back. Until then, deftly made films like In a Violent Nature, honoring the rich and still potent tradition of slasher cinema, are doing a hell of a job without them. Please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. God live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside that reality.